Welcome to Finding Certainty with your host and U.S. Army veteran, Patrick Laing. Over the next hour, you'll learn from Patrick and his expert guests how to attract more certainty into your business and your life. Now, here is your host, Patrick Laing.
Good morning and welcome to Finding Certainty. It's my favorite day of the week. I look forward to it all week. To either having an extraordinary guest on the show here where we unpack and dissect this elusive topic of certainty. As you may know, if you've been following my show for a little while now, I started doing a monologue on the first Friday of each month back in January of this year. And I've been going through the alphabet. I started with accountability. I talked about balance and so forth. Got into endurance, faith. Last month we talked about giving. And this month I struggled a little bit to come up with the best word that started with H. I thought about it. I had a few different options I was considering, but I kept coming back to H is for humility. I believe that humility is a characteristic, a principle, it should be a goal of every true leader. I'm talking about anyone who wants to be a good leader, right? A powerhouse, someone who wants to leave a legacy. I think you have to learn how to be humble. And it's interesting because I think a lot of people, when they think of humility, they think of it as being weak or tentative or shy, that you are subservient perhaps or something like that. But that's not the case at all. I mean, this is a faith-based show. I talk a lot about faith and so forth. And really, you think about it, Christ was one of the very best examples. He was the ultimate example of someone who was humble, but also powerful. He was meek, but also a force to be reckoned with. He had zero ego, but he was, as they say, a lion and a lamb. So part of what I want to do on this show today is talk about that juxtaposition, that balance between being weak, apparently, but also strong. How can you be both? How can you be, and weak is not the right word. I just say that because I think that's what a lot of people think of as humble and submissive as being weak. That is not the case. But there are these two ends of these two polar opposites, if you will, these two ends of the spectrum, where you are meek but also powerful. You're humble but also strong. How do you accomplish both? On today's show, I'm going to be sharing some examples from my life and from history. I'm going to talk a little bit about some examples that are bad examples, right? And people who are not doing a good job, and some that have done an extraordinary job, and what we can learn from them in the process. So I was discussing with a friend of mine the other day and talking about how in fact do we do this? How do we accomplish both? And I gave him examples, Mahatma Gandhi and Jesus Christ, of course, and others like Martin Luther and even Martin Luther King and so forth and so on. And this is a friend of mine who's from Israel. He lives in Tel Aviv. We were discussing the stress that so many Israelis are feeling right now with the Gaza Strip and Iran and everything that's going on. And he came back to me when I gave those examples. He said, I think it can be done as a religious leader, but I don't know that it can be done as a politician, as a political leader, or even as a business leader. We had a great discussion as we were unpacking this topic. I was telling him a little bit about the monologue I was going to do, and I was asking his thoughts. And it's interesting because he's not a Christian, and I was using Christ as an example. And he said, well, someone like Jesus Christ comes along every 2,000 years, and maybe that's what we have to accept. Maybe we have to accept that reality, that it's just not possible. But I believe it is. And we have seen examples through history and throughout our own lives. We see it today, examples of leaders that are amazing, that are strong, they're accomplished, they're incredibly talented, highly successful, but they're also humble. They're down to earth. They're authentic. earlier this week, I was invited to attend a big mastermind. It was an investors mastermind here in Las Vegas, where I live. It's funny because I was invited by half a dozen people, and they all said the tickets are only $5,000 for a VIP ticket. You can do it. And I said, yeah, no thanks, right? I'm not gonna drop $5,000 to sit for 3 days and listen to other people. But then I got a call from my friend Tony Dreammaker Doty, and he said, I have a free ticket if you want it. Well, I can do free. I was happy to attend. In fact, I brought my business partner and our senior VP of enterprise sales, Mr. Andy Tenney. I brought him with me. And we had a great day. We were only there on Wednesday. We were there for one day at this extraordinary mastermind. I want to do a shout out to Mark Harris, who's the MC and the host of the mastermind, Tony Doty, and others who were integral in bringing it about. But I believe it was a blessing, not just to attend and be able to spend some time with these folks, but also to meet new people and to see one of the most extraordinary examples that I've seen in a very long time of what exactly I am talking about. It couldn't have been more opportune with what I was planning to speak about this Friday. I met a lot of people. Kathy Ireland was there, supermodel, right? There were some really great speakers and really great business leaders. But the most impressive, the one that stood out to me, hands down, and Andy agreed with me, I think everyone who was there agreed, was the founder of Priceline.com and Booking.com, also Ubid.com, Mr. Jeff Hoffman. I found him to be incredibly charismatic. I mean, they're a $120 billion company, if I'm not mistaken. I know it's well over $100 billion. And you would think that someone like that would be arrogant, right? I think he walks on water and talking down to the audience, even unintentionally. It's just, we've all met people like that, right? They make a lot of money, they find success, and it goes straight to their head. I want to read his bio here just real quick so you can get a sense of who this guy is, because I found him to be an example that was surprising. Okay. It says Jeff Hoffman is an award-winning best-selling author, Hollywood film producer, a producer of a Grammy Award-winning jazz album, and an executive producer of an Emmy Award-winning television show. You hear those. I mean, he even won a Grammy. He helped do a jazz album, as you heard, and he won a Grammy. He helped with a television show. He won an Emmy. I mean, this guy just is incredibly successful, and he keeps hitting these hits out of the ballpark. He talked about his upbringing, how he grew up dirt poor, and was in Arizona, single mom, if I'm not mistaken, and everyone told him, "You're smoking crack, right? If you think you're going to get out of Arizona, get out of this mobile home that you live in, go make a name for yourself." He said, "You're crazy. We'll never do it." Well, he made a goal as a young man to visit 50 countries. And yet he shared something to me that I thought was really insightful. He said, I didn't want to just travel and visit 50 countries. I wanted to go and eat a meal in the home of someone in 50 countries. He says, when you're breaking bread with somebody, you truly get to know them. It's a different experience than just going and staying in a hotel, eating at restaurants, and so forth. I thought it was really interesting. It says something about him and who he is, and really the character that was so impressive. He has done his goal. In fact, he said he's visited over 120 countries. He's actually eaten a meal in the home of a family in 102 countries. And he talked a little bit about that experience, which I thought was really interesting. But, you meet a guy like this. He's worth billions of dollars. Company's worth over $100 billion. You think this guy's got to be arrogant, right? He's made lots of money. He's done things that most people can't even imagine. You can imagine him being the kind of guy who comes in, his table isn't ready or his reservation got canceled, and he says, "Do you know who I am?" Right? That's the that's the consummate example of someone who's not humble, right? But that's not at all who he was. Now, I don't know him that well. I'm just talking to some degree first impressions, but it also is evidenced in his life. It was evidence in how he spoke to us and what he talked about. It is evidence in who he is. He talked about human capital, how the most important thing you can do as a CEO, as an owner, is to find rock stars. He says that is your number one job as a company. I love that because I agree. I feel like that's my most important job as the CEO of Certainty Management, is to find rock stars, find people who are better than I am at what they do. He talked a lot about that. He talked about spiritual capitalism, where it's not just focused on money, it's focused on contribution. It's focused on making a difference. He said the money will come to you if you pay it forward, put it out there. It comes back to you not just tenfold, but 1,000-fold. And I love that. It's such a statement from a position of humility and a position of understanding. There were a lot of people there pitching him on their opportunities, their businesses, and hoping that he'd invest in them. There was a break at one point during the event where I saw the seat next to him empty. I went over and sat down, introduced myself, and the first thing I said was, "I don't want your money, and I'm not asking you to invest in my company." And his eyes lit up. He said, "You're the first person who said that to me today." And I think he appreciated that. But I said, I'm really touched by your message. See, a large part of his speech, and he gave a couple of keynote speeches. He started out the day with a short one, and then later he gave a full keynote speech that afternoon, and he talked about his story, talked about the lessons he learned, talked about human capital and focusing on people and contribution. And it resonated with me because I'm a big fan. I say we should remember HCIC, not WIFM. WIFM, of course, is what's in it for me. HCIC is how can I contribute? If you make that your mantra, your mantra, if you make that your call sign, it will change everything. I actually got up in the meeting. They were asking for testimonials. I gave a shout out to Tony, who's my friend and was very instrumental in helping it come to pass. But I talked about how our company, what really turned the corner for the Certainty Collective was when we decided to not just make income, but make a difference. We decided we wanted to do more than just do business. We wanted to do good. And it was like we turned on the faucet, right? It was like we unleashed the floodgate for our company and our team when we made that decision. We now have a whole division that we call the Certainty Service or Certainty Impact Division, where we help nonprofits raise unlimited funding at no cost. We help college students to graduate debt-free. We help people who have college debt to learn a legitimate way to eliminate it. We're trying to give back. We're trying to follow his example. Well, Jeff did the same. He talked not just about his story, but he talked about the ways in which he is giving back, the humanitarian efforts he's making, building schools and helping with battered women. And he shared this beautiful story. It was a funny story because he shared a story about how he wanted to help a battered women, a shelter in Texas that was about to get shut down. They were getting evicted that day. And so he went into the bank to get cash. He didn't want to write a check and he took his duffel bag. He put it up on the counter. He said, and all the tellers disappeared. The bank manager, they all disappeared, ran into the vault. And he said, "What's going on here?" It was really funny. He said, the bank manager poked his head out and saw who he was and said, oh, it's okay, guys, come back out. And he came up to him. He said, "Mr. Hoffman," he said, "don't ever go into a bank and put a duffel bag on the counter." He said, it looks like you're robbing the bank. So anyway, it was a funny story, but he got the cash. He went and helped these ladies and saved their homeless shelter. But he shared several examples of how he, with the the success he's experienced and the wealth he's accumulated is trying to give back and trying to make a difference. And that's what I told him. I said, I don't want your money. I don't want you to invest in my company. That's not why I'm talking to you. I said, I would like to help you in your work. I said, we have ways to raise millions of dollars to contribute to your cause. And if we could help in any way, we would be honored. And he gave me his email, his phone number. We have a meeting. We're going to talk. And I was excited to leave with that, and even more excited to have been there and to have learned from him this, and be reminded, if you will, of this important principle. Jeff, Mr. Hoffman, was, to me, a perfect example of someone who could be arrogant very easily, right? We know plenty of people who are. With his success, with his wealth, with his reputation, with the accolades he's received, he could very easily have swung the other direction. But instead, he's chosen to be humble. He's chosen to be teachable. He's chosen to be real and authentic and down to earth. And isn't that so much more attractive? Isn't that so inspiring and so just invigorating? I mean, I know it is for me, and I think many of you out there who are listening would agree. Andy and I talked about it afterwards, and it was just such a great example. I was so grateful to have it, and a great lead into this show today, because it's a real example. It's a real and living example, not just one that's been dead for many, many years, or even 2,000 years, as much as Jesus Christ is a perfect example, and we should look to him as that. It was nice having one that was 2 days ago rather than 2,000 years ago. This is not a political show, and I'm not a politician. I'm not a political commentator. I'm not very political at all, to be honest. I lean conservative, but I consider myself pretty open-minded. I've had liberals and conservatives on this show, Republicans and Democrats, independents, and everything in between. And I've always felt like this show needed to be apolitical. I think it's important that we consider each other's opinions. We walk a mile in each other's shoes. I think it's important that we give each other that respect and that deference, if you will, and approach everything, our conversations, our efforts, our legislation. I think we need to approach it in more unifying ways. I wish our politicians would do the same. We've had some really bad examples lately. Obviously, the assassination attempt on former President Trump. It was disconcerting watching the inquiries and the conversations with Secret Service Director Kimberly Cheadle. She was not willing to admit fault. She was not willing to admit that they could have done things better. There were many, many people on both sides of the aisle demanding for her resignation. And I'm sorry that she had to go through that. I wish her no ill will. I'm sorry that what happened. There were some failings, and it's unfortunate. Hopefully they'll learn from them and keep our leaders and others safer in the future. But it was an example of someone, the other end of the spectrum from Mr. Hoffman, someone who was arrogant, who was not humble, who was not willing to take the high road, if you will. It's kind of funny because you think of high road, you're going higher and you're looking down, but that's not the case when it comes to humility. Taking the high road is sinking low. It's admitting you're wrong, admitting where you could have done better, admitting your faults. Love him or hate him, President Trump, he's very divisive with a lot of people. There's people who just love him, and there's people who just detest him, right? I heard a question the other day, though, that asked, was your life better during his presidency? And apparently the polls, this was an independent Gallup poll, that said a majority, well over 50%, say that it was. That at least economically and in specific ways, life was better with him in the office. Now, if that's the case, and the polls say that a majority feel that way, why do so many people dislike him and even detest him? I don't even like him personally, just as a character. And I think it's because he comes across so arrogant. It's like a bulldog or a bull in a china shop, right? He's always coming from that level, that arrogant level. And it's, at least that's how he's portrayed, and that's how he comes across in public a lot of the time. I wanted to read just a quick list of some of his achievements, why people felt like his during his presidency, their lives were better. America gained 7 million new jobs. Unemployment reached the unemployment rate reached 3.5%. It was a half-century low. Jobless claims hit a nearly 50-year low. Record low unemployment rates for various demographic groups. Unemployment insurance claims reached a record low. Women's employment rate hit a nearly 70-year low. Middle-class family income increased nearly $6,000. Incomes rose in every U.S. Well, the list goes on, guys. It lifted nearly 7 million people off of food stamps. We had record low poverty rates for African and Hispanic Americans. Bottom 50% of households saw a 40% net worth increase. Wages rose fastest for low-income and blue-collar workers. African American home ownership increased from 4.1% to 46.4%. 41.7% to 46.4%. He brought jobs, factories, and industries back to the U.S. The Dow closed above 20,000 in 2017. I mean, the list goes on and on, guys. He passed a $3.2 trillion historic tax relief. And, I mean, I could keep going. Signed a $100 billion Family First Coronavirus Relief Act. Signed the $2.3 trillion CARES Act. And so forth and so on. This is about 5% of the list I found online. So all of these things happened. And yet, fake news aside, whatever you believe about that, there are so many people out there, conservatives and liberals and beyond, who don't like the guy. And I think it's a sad commentary on a leader who could do so much more if he would understand the principle. I mean, this is a mouthful, right? I listed 5% of the list of things he accomplished as a president, and yet so much of his accomplishments were lost and have been lost because people despise him so much. Now, I have a cousin who's worked closely with President Trump. He helped build several of the buildings here in Vegas. That was involved with the Trump Tower and so forth, and he's worked closely with Donald Trump. He says a lot of it's not true. A lot of it is fake news. It's spun. It's spin, as they say, right? It's things exaggerated and so forth. But we've all heard him speak. We all know he is who he is, right? Love him or hate him, his characteristics, his character, his ego comes through loud and clear. And a lot of conservatives put up with it, honestly, because they know what he can accomplish for the country economically. He's a strong military leader. And I do agree that things like Ukraine and the Gaza Strip and others probably wouldn't have happened if he was in office. So here's the dilemma, though. How do you have a strong leader like that, who's strong economically, ostracized and doesn't divide the nation the way that he unfortunately has? Personally, I think he's, whether from feedback or just personal reflection, he's realized or is realizing that he doesn't have to do both, right? If you hear his speeches lately, he's tempering them. He's softening them a little bit, not completely, but he does have to be who he is, and he does have to be strong. But again, Christ, as a perfect example, was meek and powerful. He had zero ego, but he was never weak. He was a lion and a lamb. Is that something that someone like President Trump or any of our political leaders could be? I believe they could. It's interesting because at least with the good examples, the more powerful they are, they have a choice to make, right? It's like they come to a fork in the road that says, I can go right or I can go left. I can be arrogant or I can be humble. I can be strong, but do I have to be weak as well? No. You can be quiet and controlled and disciplined. You can be confident, but also be teachable. I think it's one of the strongest characteristics of any leader, that they are teachable. And so while we are being accountable, we are trying to be teachable. We're trying to find that happy balance, which is challenging. It's difficult. I know. I'm a CEO. I've seen it throughout my life. It is a difficult goal. It's a difficult objective. It's not just political leaders. It's not just religious. It's as parents. It's in our relationships. It's in friendships. How do we find that balance? How do we strike that balance between the two ends of the spectrum? Jeff Hoffman, I believe, has. Now, I don't know him well. It's a first impression. It was based on one speech and a little bit of research I've done, but I believe he's an example of someone who is, if he's not stricken that balance, have achieved that balance, he's trying to. And that's one of the keys to getting there, is being open to the possibility that we can do better. And seeking in our daily efforts, in our business, in our relationships, to get there, right? We're going to go to break right now, and I'll let you look at our advertisers and let them look at you, but we'll be right back. I'm going to share with you a personal example from my life that is, I think, even closer to home. And it's one that I learned a great deal from, and I have ever since, over the last almost 30 years. We'll be right back. But when you come back, I want to share with you this personal example. I think it'll share some additional insights to this so important topic of humility. Don't go away.
Follow Voice America at Facebook.com/Voice America for juicy updates from your favorite radio shows and podcasts.
Certainty Management can help create more certainty in your life with our deep discount health insurance options, even for 1099s, part-time employees, volunteers, and more. Pay less to protect yourself, your loved ones, and your team. Call 888-684-3122 for a free quote today. That's 888-684-3122. Visit us on the web at CertaintyTeam.com. That's Certainty, T-E-A-M, like Mary.com.
Voice America programs are now available on your favorite connected device, including Amazon, Alexa, and Google Home. Through streams with Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, and iHeartRadio, listening to your favorite show is as easy as saying the show name followed by the word podcast.
Hey, Alexa, play Finding Your Frequency podcast.
If that doesn't work, try adding on TuneIn or on iHeartRadio or on Apple Podcasts.
If you're a nonprofit in need of funding, we can help. Certainty Management is a cost reduction firm that also helps churches, schools, sports teams, and other nonprofits raise unlimited zero-cost funding. Best of all, you don't have to sell anything or ask for donations. Call 888-684-3122 to learn more today. That's 888-684-3122. Visit us on the web at CertaintyTeam.com. That's Certainty, T-E-A-M, like Mary.com.
Voice America Business Network, the bottom line in business.
You're listening to Finding Certainty with Patrick Laing. Have a question for Patrick or his guests? Join us on the show at 866-472-5790. That's 866-472-5790. Now, back to the show with Patrick.
Welcome back to Finding Certainty. Talking about the topic of humility today. I think it's a really important characteristic and trait. It's an important goal that we should all have if we want to create more certainty in our lives. I think it's integral to this growth, this journey that we're going through to find more certainty, to develop it in our lives. So I mentioned a perfect example, or a personal example. It's also a pretty perfect example, but I mentioned a personal example from my own life. Years ago, I worked for a company named Trend West Resorts. They were eventually bought out by Wyndham Worldwide. I was a customer first, and then I was a sales representative for them second. I actually worked out of the Anchorage, Alaska office. Well, it just came to me. We were a vacation ownership company. We were helping people buy credits to go on vacation, and Trend West had all these resorts all over the Northwest and elsewhere. And I just took to it like fish to water, right? I came in and started in about April and hit what they call their President's Club by October of that year. It was a record nobody had ever done. In about 7 months, I did what most people struggled to do in 12. And I hit it again the next year. And so I very quickly became one of the top reps in the country and was making more money than I'd ever made as this young kid, and just thought I was all that in a bag of chips, right? Well, through a divorce and a series of events, I ended up transferring to Vancouver, Washington. And I went to work with a man named Dennis Burbank. He was the project director there. I'd been there for many years, making extraordinary income, multiple six digits a year, and running one of the top offices in the country. Well, I learned a very important lesson on my very first day that I've never forgotten. I got my first tour. My first guests came in. They sat down. I gave them the pitch, and they bought right off the bat. And I said, as I was walking them back to get their paperwork and so forth, I said, just loud enough that anyone nearby could hear, I said, that was easy. I was this quote-unquote superstar coming in from the great Northwest, the frozen North, to this Vancouver office. I sold my very first deal, and I was going to make sure everybody knew that, it wasn't any easier to sell them in Vancouver. If anything, it was maybe even harder, but it was still easy for me. And you know what happened? You can probably guess. It's just like praying for humility or praying for patience. I don't ever do that. The Lord will bless you with chronic illness or something. But literally, that was the last sale I made for the next 3 months. I mean, I had so much egg on my face, you could have called me an omelet. I could not give it away. I struggled to get someone to even listen to me. And before I had moved from Anchorage to Vancouver, I sold almost every day, right? I was making extraordinary income. I transferred to Vancouver, had this little arrogant experience. And the Lord said, okay, well, I think you need to learn this lesson, my son. And I was broke and embarrassed and truly humbled, not of my own desire, but I was humbled, and I've never forgotten that lesson. Well, my project director, as I said, was Dennis Burbank, and he was a great example of talent, of expertise, but also humility. He was a great coach. He was number one branch for many, many years, top project director, went on to become a senior executive with Wyndham Worldwide, and we've been friends ever since. He could have written me off. Thought, this Patrick Laing guy, he's just a big bag of wind, right? He was surprised, I think. He didn't know I was going through my own little Gethsemane, my own a cathartic experience that apparently the Lord knew I needed. But he never held it against me. In fact, he's always been complimentary to me. He's always talked me up. I eventually resigned, went to and did something else because it wasn't working. And yet I've been friends with Dennis ever since. 25 years now, right? There's several characteristics, I believe, that stand out in a leader that is both meek but powerful, right? Humble but strong. And Dennis is not just a personal example, but as I said, in my opinion, a perfect example of this. Great leaders like this have success and achievement, and they get the accolades, they get their awards, rewards. Jeff Hoffman, who I talked about, has obviously made billions of dollars and lives a life many could only dream of, and yet he remains humble. Dennis is the same. I think one of the keys of a humble yet powerful, a meek yet powerful leader is consistency. They're not highs and lows. They're not hit and miss. They're not one way one day and another way the next day. They are humble, but they are also consistent. They're also aware of their own strengths and weaknesses. They surround themselves by people who are better than them. We had managers like Dylan Miller, who is also a friend to this day, who were extraordinary, and Dennis knew that. He recruited and groomed and surrounded himself by people who were phenomenal. That human capital that Jeff Hoffman talked about earlier this week. I think another sign of a humble leader, a great leader, is that they trust their people. They don't just surround themselves by great people, but they trust them. They learn how to delegate. Delegation is evidence of a humble person. I struggle with it. My team is constantly asking me to give them more to do, and it is an area in which I personally struggle, and I'm working on. Because when you recognize that you need help and you ask for help, when you recognize that you don't think you can do it better than everyone else, when you admit you're not perfect, you admit you need someone to help share the workload, amazing things happen. Whether it's a symbol of you being humble or just being smart, it's unifying. It shows you trust your people. It's bonding. It's encouraging. And it does take work off your plate, so you're going to get more done, which is what I'm coming to learn. It's amazing. I can get so much more done if I'm not trying to do it all myself. But it is unifying. Dennis was a great example that he understood how important that was. If President Trump or President Biden, whoever is in office, could understand not just the power of delegation, but the power of unification, consistency, trust, removing ego and just replacing it with charisma, amazing things would happen. My friend Tony Doty, they call him Tony Dreammaker Doty. He's probably one of the best connectors I've ever met. He talks about how the next characteristic I want to mention has the highest vibration, the highest frequency known to man. They've actually tested this they have the equipment these days to test frequencies. We all know a positive thought vibrates faster than a negative thought, something like 10,000 times faster. That's why you shouldn't focus on the negative. It's just going to attract more frequencies into your path that you don't want. Well, I learned something new this week from Tony, and he said that they have proven that authenticity vibrates 4 times faster than even love and even gratitude. And those were the highest vibrations. We've talked about that for years. Authenticity, though, he says, vibrates even faster. Isn't that interesting? Because when we are authentic, we're real. We're our real self. We pull back the curtain and we expose ourselves, as it were, as who we truly are. Good, bad, the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? This is who I am. I'm not perfect, but I'm real. I found that very interesting. And it plays right into this conversation about humility and the strength of a humble leader. an authentic leader. He was authentically imperfect, and he admitted it. And his people loved him. To this day, we're still friends, as I said. If he had just been my project director, my supervisor, trying to get me going and cheering me on because he wanted me to sell, that would be one thing. But I failed as a salesperson with him. I was an abysmal failure. In that short time that I was there before I finally had to quit and go get a job that would pay me something I could live on because I could not give it away. The Lord was still teaching me that lesson that was so important that I needed to learn. And yet his authenticity and his consistency ring true in the fact that he didn't cut me off. He didn't stop that relationship. We've been friends and colleagues and trusted advisors. I consider him one of my biggest mentors. And we've been that for 25 years. You know, I do want to make a comment about comparing ourselves to others, because when we interact with amazing leaders, it's easy to think, wow, they're so much more talented than me. They're so much more accomplished. There's so much more, just fill in the blank, than I am. And it's important that we don't compare ourselves with others. It is a reminder I wanted to mention during this monologue. The only person we have to compete with is ourselves. And there's a lot of times when we're too hard on ourselves. You know, we forgive others, but we don't forgive ourselves. We're patient with others, but we're self-critical to a degree that being humble is a negative. We think, you know, we're so hard on ourselves, and yet we're oftentimes more patient, more supportive, more insightful, more wise with others. And I do want to encourage you to be humble in your interactions, not just with others, but also in your own life and in your own thoughts and in your own self-analysis. I mean, be okay with your true self. I'm not saying you shouldn't continue to improve, because part of being your true self is expanding your true self and becoming more of your true self. But don't hold yourself up to unrealistic standards, to others' standards. Don't try to be something that you're not. Try to be more, but be authentic and consistent and be unifying in your own life. Be aware and empathetic, but be patient. Give yourself a break. These are all characteristics of humility. Hopefully President Trump and other leaders like him can figure this out. I mean, you can be a bulldog and a bit of a golden retriever, right? Everyone loves golden retrievers. They love everyone. Imagine a political leader. Let's put Trump aside, Biden, whoever else is in the picture. Imagine a leader. I think what we need is a billionaire who can fund his own campaign and isn't beholden to lobbyists and big pharma and so forth. But I think that's probably a key piece, but also someone who didn't alienate either side, who had their principles, but also had this inherent desire to bring us together. I mean, can you imagine what that kind of leader would be if they had that Christ-like characteristic of being meek and powerful, unifying and inspiring both at the same time? Now, regrettably, they'd probably never be nominated, but I wish they could. To have that humility and that strength to go in and clean up the swamp. And, if someone understood this and understood these characteristics, it would be incredible. It applies in our own lives, too. We're talking on a large scale, a national scale. I think it would lead to peace between nations if leaders could understand that. But what about peace in our own home? I've talked in the past about one of my very favorite books. I want to get the author on my show, Greg Bear. He's the author of Real Love. And he talks about how essential it is to have zero expectations of your spouse and focus on yourself. He said, humility combined with unconditional love and service. That's no conditions. You are serving because it is the right thing to do, and you've made a commitment to do so. He says that is the key to success in marriage. It's hard when you're starting out. Maybe you're a small business or an aspiring entrepreneur. It's hard when you're starting out because Of course, you want to put your best foot forward. You want to highlight your strengths, but you also want to be real and authentic. So how do you do that, right? It's a balancing act. At our company, for example, we have associates across the country. We have clients in all 50 states. This is true. We have one of our divisions of the 7 division, one of our product lines and vendor partners that has clients in all 50 states. And so we promote that. I mean, it's a great statement, right? Literally in all 50 states, we have at least one client. We share that point because we're proud of it and we're connected to it. But we also, in a very real sense, we're promoting that point to build our reputation as a company. The fact that we've saved clients millions of dollars. We have another statement we say that we've seen $250 million in contracts influenced. Those aren't all contracts that we personally did. They're contracts our vendor partner has done. We haven't personally done. We have saved our clients millions of dollars. But my point is this. You have to fake it to make it a little bit. You have to promote your strengths, downplay your weaknesses. You have to, as I said, put your best foot forward. You have to create your brand and build that brand, and do so by highlighting your highlights, right? Highlighting your strong points. You also, though, need to be honest. You can be honest without hurting your image. You can focus on your highlights, your strong points, and more without bending the truth. You may exaggerate it. You may promote it. You may focus in on the good and downplay the bad, et cetera, et cetera. But you can do so without misrepresenting. And this is the point I want to make. Fake it till you make it, as they say. But I'm not saying to lie. I'm not saying to misrepresent. I am saying to focus on your strengths and downplay your weaknesses until your weaknesses catch up. We all have to do that. Every business has to do that. You focus on what you do well, on the relationships you have, on your characteristics and your attributes, and maybe the experience that you've brought to the table, but you downplay maybe how long you've been in business, how many clients you have, how well you do things, because you're still learning. Somebody asked me the other day, what's your annual volume as a company? I said, we don't share that. It's private. I could have told him, maybe he would have been impressed, maybe he wouldn't have been, but you can be selective in what you share. And I encourage you to do so, but don't be dishonest. I believe that this it isn't being arrogant or deceitful. It's just what you have to do as a business from a marketing standpoint. Through it all, make the effort to admit when you fall short or admit when you're wrong. Don't be shy. Don't be afraid to be authentic and real, to be genuine. I tell my salespeople all the time, we're recruiting a lot of salespeople. We refer to what we do as, and what we have as the best sales job in town. But I tell them all the time, don't be overwhelmed by the fact we have 7 divisions. We have 21 different product lines. I said, pick one, pick a lane, as it were, become an expert in that one, but at least be familiar with the other things we do. And I share this with them, and I say, you will never have a client look down on you or look poorly. It will never cost you a sale if you have to say, I'm not the expert in it, but I know we can help with your merchant processing, or we can help with your printer and copier contract. I know that we can cut it in half on average. I don't know how that's done. That's not my area of expertise. I'm new to the company. I'm still learning. Whatever you have to say, you will never lose a sale by being honest, humble, and real. And I tell my team that all the time. This is an example of being humble while also being accountable. Admitting where you fall short or may not be up to par, but being proactive enough to fix it. You can say, I don't know the answer to that question, but I can find it out. And guess what happens? Your customer respects you for being honest. You go find the answer and you learn it, so maybe next time you do know it, and you both win. This is key. And it's one of the secrets to certainty. We all go through this, right? It's inevitable. It's all part of the process of learning and growing and gaining the skills we need to be a fully competent leader. We don't gain characteristics and strength through osmosis or observation. We gain these things, these critical characteristics, by doing. And we do it by failing, and hopefully failing forward. It's okay to admit when we're wrong or weak or need help. That's not weak, it's strong. I was invited to be an author, to contribute to a book a couple of years ago called Mission Matters, and I wrote my chapter on accountability. I won't go into it now, we're running out of time. But I said one of the most important questions you can ask is, what else can I do? And one of the most important things you can do a lot of the time is ask for help. Work with mentors and coaches and others who have experience that you don't. Surround yourselves by good people. I was so grateful to meet Mark Harris this week and Jeff Hoffman. These are adding to my network. They're the type of people that I want in my tribe. I want surrounding me. When you build your tribe, rely on them. Have faith in them. You may have to fake it a little bit till you make it, but make sure you're taking good people who are even better than you, and know that you know that. Make sure you're taking them with you. Just make sure that you infuse as much integrity, honesty, and authenticity into it all. Don't ever lie. Don't misrepresent. How do we get there? I believe 3 things will help. 1, recognize that you're not there yet and that it's okay. Cut yourself some slack. Admit when you're wrong and where you need help. You need to be honest with yourself first and foremost. Be patient with yourself and with others, and be patient with the process. 2, be open to input. Accept feedback and insights, constructive criticism, and more. You'll never get where you want to go if you don't do this, or if you can't adopt this practice, this approach, this habit of asking for input. We just had a great meeting yesterday with a company with 11,000 employees. We can bring them 15 free benefits. And the guy who introduced us said, can we do a debrief after? I left the call excited, thinking it was a great call. We did great. He gave me feedback on several things we could have done better. And I learned from that debrief. This is a gentleman who's much more experienced than I am. And he gave feedback that I valued. Lastly, measure your results. Don't improve what you don't measure. Your metrics, data, analysis, it's so important. Don't, doing these ongoing debriefs and litmus tests and asking for feedback. Don't just wait till it happens, but actually ask for it. Be accountable to that. My brother Adam worked for a Berkshire Hathaway company for years, and he said he was inspired by working with these 90-year-old business leaders like Charlie Munger and others. I mean, Warren Buffett's company, right? These 90-year-olds sitting around a conference room asking for feedback and input and still learning at their age. That's what Jeff Hoffman is doing. He talked a lot about this. Christ was the ultimate example. He said to his followers, "Who do you say that I am?" He, too, asked for feedback. He was constantly focused on others, how they were, and most importantly, how he could help. And he gave his life for it. We can do the same. I'm not talking about hanging on a cross. I'm talking about sacrificing or putting our own personal interests ahead of others and dedicating at least some of our resources, some of our time, and some of our attention to making a difference in the lives of those around us. When we do this, without thinking of ourselves first, it changes everything. Not only will we become more humble, but we will attract people to us. We will make a difference in their lives, and we'll leave a legacy behind us in the process. And I promise you, it's true. Thank you for listening to Finding Certainty today. I hope you have a great weekend. Hope you're enjoying these monologues. I'm enjoying giving them. But remember, there is certainty out there. You can have it. You can find it. You can develop it in your life. We can help. Take care, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks for tuning into today's episode of Finding Certainty. We hope you've gained some more insight into how to create more certainty in your own business or nonprofit. Join us next week for another taste of the Certainty Experience. Until then, we wish you greater certainty in all that you do.